think that Anne has the Italian cadence much better than I do. So if my buongiorno is not as lyrical as hers, please do forgive me. But it's such a great pleasure to see so many faces here this morning here in Venice. In many ways, one can say that this kind of gathering is part of what the Biennale is, but it also is part of what makes an exhibition a potential site for important discussions, but more importantly, an important site of disputes. And I should hope that the curriculum, the topic around which we are gathered here over the next 3 days, will be an opportunity not only simply to offer our views and opinions about the shape of ideas and knowledge around the world, but a way in which one can also think about the responsibility, not necessarily of art, but the responsibility of an exhibition as a public forum. When I was invited to organize this edition of the Biennale, this was in late 2013, and God forbid, it's been now almost 2 years since that occurrence. It was not clearly apparent to me what exactly the topic of the Biennale would be, but over the few weeks after the appointment, the ideas began to crystallize. And for an exhibition that was made in 11 months, from January 2014 to the time the first checklist and list of artists had to be submitted to the Biennale in November. So much already happened around the world. So the Biennale, the exhibition, was also part of a process of thinking. And this process of thinking had to do with what one could call the state of things. The state of things around the world that demanded not only just response, but also demanded an analytical lens through which the exhibition can become a kind of thinking machine. So whichever direction one chose, it seemed to me that it is in the unremitting potential and power of art that we must summon new approaches to representation in order to renew and challenge our vision of reality, to unmake old images and infuse them with new potency. However, it is not necessarily the case that the work of art should address or reflect the historical conditions of its time, nor is there any essential necessity that it should do so. Art has no obligation. It can always choose to stay silent, deaf to all appeals for social awareness and critical engagement. Art can seek protection from the purifying fury of earnest concern by withdrawing from the disordered affairs that torment men, women, and the world. It is indeed the right of every artist to strike such a stance of radical refusal, and in the name of artistic and strategic autonomy, to resist being goaded into interminable commentary on the state of the world and its inhabitants' miserable circumstances. While such right of disengagement and distance might seem proper to art and the conduct of artists, for an exhibition of art, however, it is quite another matter. The exhibition format as a forum of public discovery of art's potential in the face of difficulty and the inscrutable has limited leeway or margin for withdrawal. An exhibition is something that happens in the world and carries with it the noise, pollution, dust, and decay that comes from that world. And as many of you know, one of the central images for the Biennale is Paul Klee's Angelus Novus. And of course, we've all sort of read Benjamin's interpretation of this small picture and the idea of the debris that comes with the catastrophe that is called progress. But like the growing mass of debris, it is part of the messy world it inhabits that is the exhibition. An exhibition as a space of public discourse, as a stage of anticipatory practices, and as a statement of intent can no more assert a distance from its cultural context than it can repress the very social conditions that bring it into dialogue with its diverse publics. What then should a grand exhibition of art such as La Biennale di Venezia tell us about the state of art and of the world in which art is produced today? Should artists be invited to contribute to the international exhibition merely to present only the mechanisms and internal calculations of their practices? Or can their work, ideas, and concepts infuse the space of the exhibition with a vision of art's relationship to its historical context? For an exhibition such as the 56th International Venice Biennale, there are times, especially in the decades-long process of radical unmaking and destruction, of uncertainty and discord, of destruction and displacement, that the world has witnessed over this period, when it seems impossible to strike a stance of disengagement from the state of things by placing faith in the irreducible, transcendental, and universal values of art. Perhaps even in the limited sense of a correspondence between art and contemporary events that circumscribe its production, the making of art is bound to the making of meaning. Art must say something to which we can respond. At this moment, one can say that the world is hungry, not merely for insight into the contradictions of the human condition, but for meaning. So it is for this reason that I chose to invite Creative Time and the Creative Time Summit to participate in the Biennale. So let me use the opportunity to say thank you so much to Ann Pasternak, Neto Thompson, Katie Hollander, and all the members of the Creative Time family and community for agreeing to join us in this endeavor. Because without their commitment, the rigor of their participation in the broad discussions in which art is made, this will not be possible. So, regardless of where in the world then one lives, every waking hour is saturated with terrible news from elsewhere. Sanaa, Aleppo, Mosul, Tripoli, Moscow, Paris, Gaza, Cairo, Jerusalem, Dhaka, Hong Kong, Caracas, Maiduguri, Peshawar, Kabul, Donetsk, Crimea, Tunis, Mogadishu, Nairobi, and so on and so forth. Not a single hour passes without residents somewhere in the far-off elsewhere being confronted by the golems and phantoms of disarray and disorder. It is as if the entire global society, from the smallest hamlet to the most massive megacity, exists in the long, interminable insomnia of rulers and the endless days of vigil kept by protesters and citizens. Sordid governmentalities and shredded social relations keep rulers and the ruled on a permanent state of alert, a form of wakefulness that touches the imagination, numbs the mind, scars the body. In this realm of dissolution of the global landscape, In this realm of dissolution, the global landscape is jittery with apparitions. Images appear and recede. Language becomes guttural, turns to stone. While in the burgeoning art system, contemporary art turns cold in a repose of formalist rigor mortis. This, perhaps, is the state of things. With this view, what do we see? What to do in an exhibition of contemporary art, especially in this moment of crude iconoclasm? A leap into the messy ground of iconophilia? A different logic in which desacralizing images is pressed into service of gesture and effect. Caught between this zone of internecine battle, of collapse and despair, indeterminacy and determination, it is not unreasonable to suggest that a reappraisal of art's reflection on our porous of perception is called for. This exhibition, then, comes at a moment of disturbance, a period full of contradictions, mixing blindness and insight. Global society is constantly being confronted by the pull and push of history. Surveying the plateau of debris that grows from this moment and rises ever skyward, along with events that precede it, one does feel as if summoned by Clay's angel of history. Thanks to Walter Benjamin, who bought that small-scale work in 1921. Over the years, it has acquired a kind of cult status of clairvoyance. The miracle of this diminutive and almost rudimentary drawing belies its current perceptive power, well beyond its actual representation. Benjamin had intuited in Clay's little picture what in fact was not registered nor even painted in it. Instead, he read Angelus Novus allegorically, seeing the picture with clear historical eyes as a diagnosis of what had come before and in anticipation of what was yet to come. At the same time, Benjamin was reflecting on the theology of violence, the crisis of humanism, and on the catastrophe that was unfolding in Europe, a crisis that would subsequently swallow up millions of lives. Can a work of art bear witness to its time, as Benjamin appeared to suggest in his brief entry on Angelus Novus? Coming out of the debacle of the First World War and with a premonition of the Second World War, the character of visionary art is to challenge perception by excavating the painting as a very image of the reality unfolding before him, with the state of the world he knew being dismantled right before his very own eyes. Benjamin compels us, qua Clay's painting, to revision the representational capacity of art. His novel interpretation of the animated stick figure, standing in the middle of Clay's composition, with shocked expression in his eyes as the angel of history, at whose feet the wreckage of modern destruction reaches new summits, remains a vivid image, not only for what the picture actually contains and the image it registers, but also for the way Benjamin brought into focus how a work of art can challenge us to see much further and beyond the prosaic appearance of things. Conflict is always born of discontent. Paradoxically, change happens the same way. When La Biennale de Venezia was founded in the end of the 19th century, the modern age had ushered in a century earlier many of the changes that remain a constant feature of our current age. From the creation of the American nation in the late 18th century to the abolition of slavery in the mid-19th century, the French Revolution to the Haitian War of Independence from France, the Industrial Revolution to the creation of the global labor movement, from the technological advances as the invention of the cotton gin, the steam engine, vaccines, photography, and cinema, to the industrial scale machinery of war. From the plantation economy to colonialism. And I say this in terms of the plantation economy, especially to those who, in the name of labor, who, in their work, tend to think ahistorically that labor is only really confined to what workers do, but have no interest in linking the relationship between labor and slavery and the history of that, as if when one hears Black Lives Matter, that we are really only talking about race. And I think I would like to compel those who do such works to really begin to re-envision the historical necessity to think historically in the present. So what I would like to say is that over the course of the last 2 centuries, radical changes from industrial to post-industrial modernity, technological to digital modernity, mass migration to mass mobility, environmental disasters and genocidal conflicts, chaos and promise, civil rights and social justice have produced serious reflections toward a redefinition of the social contract. The bold courage of artists and of activists and war resistors, the critique of society and the march of civil rights campaigners, anti-colonial projects, and the feminist movement have made fascinating subject matter for artists, writers, filmmakers, performers, composers, and musicians. I mean, you see the work of Luigi Nono, Noncosimiamo Max, and all these other projects that are inside the exhibition. So when one says that, what about beauty? The question one has to talk about when we ask ourselves about beauty is maybe to refer back to Yeats in The Second Coming, the aftermath of the First World War, when he talks about a terrible beauty being born and some animal slashing towards Bethlehem to die. Well, what I want to say is art and artists cannot be dispossessed of the power to speak about the present. Art and artists cannot be dispossessed of the capacity to reflect the social conditions under which art itself is made, traded, and positioned. I am not an evangelist for art, but nevertheless, I think it's important in what we are, okay. I'm almost done. But let me just simply let me end with a very, brief conclusion. And it draws from the preface and, of course, the book by Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari's Anti-Oedipus, Capitalism and Schizophrenia. And here, Michel Foucault, who wrote the preface, recalls a moment between the years 1945 to 65 in Europe, and he refers to this period as the impassioned, jubilant, enigmatic years. In Foucault's illuminating preface, he wasted no time cautioning us to beware not only of the industry of repression that accompanies power, but to resist what he calls the fascism in all of us, in our heads, in our everyday behavior. The fascism that causes us to love power, to desire the very thing that dominates and exploits us. Should we not heed this caution when, in the name of art, art must be appropriately disengaged, depoliticized, respectable, and refrain from giving offense? What are we to make then of the strange business between art and power, the relationship between the brokers of power and many of us who enable and exploit access to that power? That art is a core element of the logic of power and is highly circumscribed redistributive circuits and conduits should not in itself trouble our sleep. Art and money have always been good bedfellows, and no one should begrudge artists when they make a living from their work. But when the value of art grows so exponentially that its cultural and artistic value lags behind its exchange value, we must take notice. We should, by necessity, pause to examine and observe the cultural and social effects of this epistemological misalignment. At the foundation of the current economic analysis of art is the unquestionable form of power that hovers over its circulation. To engage this very moment, when all hears are numbing sums paid for single artworks that are immediately withdrawn from public circulation due to their high value, one has to develop a critical horizon for imagining how art performs beyond the bounds of power. Foucault's unvanished proposal is to imagine, and I quote, an art of living counter to all forms of fascism, whether already present or impending. He writes that such counter-discourse, and I quote, carries a number of essential principles, which he summarizes as free political action from all unitary and totalizing paranoia, develop action, thought, and desires by proliferation, juxtaposition, and disjunction, and not by subdivision and pyramidal hierarchization. Withdraw allegiance from old categories of the negative, law, limit, castration, lack, lacuna, which Western thought has so long held as sacred as a form of power and an access to reality. And he ends by saying, prefer what is possible, positive and multiple, difference over uniformity, flows over unities, mobile arrangements over systems. And I hope that the next 2 days will be an occasion to engage within the construction of the curriculum all these topics. Thank you so much.